Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we are going to discuss about the root causes of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. I am Hafsa Mazhar. I am working as national representative in National Hub Pakistan and running RSH program here. So, sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment is quite a grave issue. If we talk about the context of Pakistan, this is actually impacting lots of life. And it is also making lives difficult for the people and the vulnerable people, particularly certain groups who are at risk at the moment. Today, our panelists will reflect on underlying reasons and causes of sexual exploitation in Pakistan particularly, and as well as discuss the root causes and the key contributing factors which are affecting making the sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment acceptable in certain societies. And it is also, the root causes also in touch with the power dynamics and inequalities and other all related issues will be discussed today. I'm going to share some of the key findings and key facts and figures wanted to highlight what's the situation of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment in Pakistan. So we are going to start formally, but before that, I wanted to share with you about RSH. Research and Support Hub is basically working on safeguarding from sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, and we are supporting local small CSOs so that we can help them to build their capacities to address the safeguarding issues and also how to protect the staff and the communities they are working with from the issues of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment in Pakistan. So RSH is a part of a consortium. The consortium member include ICWA, Options, Clear Global, Social Development Direct, and Site Savers. So let's have a look on the agenda today. So we are starting, we already started. And now we are going to have a quick look on the facts and figures with regards to sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment situation in Pakistan and globally overall. Then we are going to invite our next speaker with our Mahjabeen Qazi. She's going to talk about the terms and also taking us explaining all the terms separately and how we can differentiate the things between, what is exploitation, abuse, and harassment. Then we'll move on, and our next speaker will going to discuss the dynamics of the power dynamics and social issues which are associated with sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. And we are also going to discuss how we can adopt a preventive measures which can help us, especially working in the development sector and in emergencies in Pakistan, to protect people from sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. And then we will open floor for questions, and our session will be concluded after the discussion and your questions. Thank you very much. Now, I will request my colleague to move on to next slide. According to UN Women's and UN figures, every third woman is a victim and a survivor of sexual violence. And during COVID, the GBV, sexual violence and harassment, considered as a shadow pandemic. There was detailed studies and the facts behind that, why they were saying that the sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment and GBV is a shadow pandemic because of the COVID. The vulnerabilities of certain marginalized groups, including the women, that has experienced the grave issue, and the issue increased for them, and their lives were making more vulnerable and more difficult for them to live. If we talk about the Pakistan's ranking on Gender Global Index is considered on a very, very, very low ranking. Out of 146 countries, we are at 142. But unfortunately, if I talk about the previous reports, unfortunately, this is unfortunate, I have to say this, the Pakistan has been ranked on a very low, even the second last position since last 4 years. And what are the key reasons are the gender parity. So and gender parity on a different sectors with the global indexes highlighting. Then when it comes to the Pakistan's figure on accessing information, we can see, according to the gender parity report of PCSW Punjab, it is highlighted that in Pakistan, the women, as compared to men, have a less access to internet and information, which is quite low. Then, if we look at this report is also highlighting some of the key grave figures like 9,000 plus cases, around 10,000 cases has been reported against violence against women in Punjab. Then 33 million people were displaced in last year flood. In 22 flood, we have seen that was a very that flood actually swept away all the villages, and the people were on our roads, and there was a very difficult situation, especially for the women and the girls who were at the roads. The women and the girls, particularly adolescent girls, are increased risk of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, including the risk of the child marriage and child trafficking, which is increasing day by day. Then the marginalized people, persons with disabilities, and transgender communities also experiencing increased violence and vulnerabilities. So, keeping in view the situation, we selected this topic to discuss it. What are the key root causes with making it more acceptable in our society? With this note, I'm moving on to invite my first speaker of today's discussion, Ms. Mahjabeen. Ms. Mahjabeen Kazi is working as an program analyst with UN Women. She has a wealth of experience of working on gender-based violence issues and protection from the sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. And she is also coordinating PSEA group in Pakistan, which is working to address this grave issue. She has a wealth of experience over 20 years. Now I'm going to invite Mahjabeen to discuss the issues of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, and take us through. Thank you. Over to Mahjabeen now.
Thank you very much, Hafsa. Just a small correction. I am working for UNFPA. So moving forward, building on what Hafsa has shared on the statistics that Pakistan has, just to develop common understanding on the key terminologies around sexual exploitation and abuse and harassment. What we mean by sexual exploitation is actual or attempted abuse of a position of vulnerability, differential power, or trust for sexual purposes, including but not limited to profiting monetarily, socially, or politically from the sexual exploitation of another. So basically what it says is that when there is a power differential between the two groups or individuals, and that influences the exploitation, it could be, and especially if it is sexual, then that means sexual exploitation. So the next important terminology here is the sexual abuse. What we mean by sexual abuse, because there are many terminologies and we are often confuse them with each other, and then we don't know how to put forward that particular case. So sexual abuse means actual or threatened physical intrusion of sexual nature, whether by force or under unequal coercive conditions. Sexual harassment is unwelcoming remarks. Even if you're passing remarks in the presence of a person that feels uncomfortable about it, it can come under the category of sexual harassment. Sexual advances that one can make towards another person against the will of that person, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of sexual nature. It can occur between colleagues and also when power differentials between staff members are abused. So sexual harassment particularly refers to the workplace environment where it takes place between the two individuals within the workplace. It could be between men and men, women and women, and between men and women to men. So this is where we categorize the sexual harassment in it. There's 6 core principles relating to protection against sexual exploitation and abuse. These core 6 principles were actually, if we know about Interagency Standing Committee, which is chaired by the Secretary General of United Nations, on sexual harassment and sexual exploitation and abuse. They issue guidelines back in 2003, and then these were updated in 2013 and later on in 2019, 18 and 19. There are 6 core principles which we are categorizing under the Protection Against Sexual Exploitation and Abuse. And these are specially related to when we're talking about sexual harassment, which is within the workplace. PSEA, we are referring to it in the humanitarian context between a humanitarian aid worker and the beneficiary. So there are 6 core principles which we need to be very cognizant about whenever we're engaged in humanitarian assistance. The first one is, C constitute acts of gross misconduct and are grounds for termination of employment. So if any humanitarian aid workers is guilty of sexual exploitation and abuse cases, that can lead to termination of employment. And as per the guidelines, it stands no second chances. So the HR policies around C are extremely strict. The second important thing is that sexual activity with children under 18 years is strictly prohibited. There is no excuse if somebody who is found guilty of this act says that he or she was not aware of the other person's age. If that person was below 18 or not, that is no excuse. Again, there is no leniency on that. The third very important element is exchange of money, employment, goods, or services for sex prohibited, including hiring prostitutes. So where Hafsa very rightly mentioned about the flood 2022, where a huge humanitarian response was going on, and a lot of people, like 33 million people, were identified in need of support, humanitarian aid. So in case of any humanitarian worker was providing any assistance or package in return for money or employment or any other bribe, so that comes under the category of PSEA, and that strictly says don't hire, bribe anyone for sex. The fourth one is any sexual relationship between beneficiary that involves improper use of position is prohibited. So again, no sex with beneficiaries. Even if you say that, going back to the third point, prostitution, even if the person is by profession a prostitute, for humanitarian aid worker to maintain the highest level of ethics, it's not allowed to even get in contact with such people for such relationships. For assistance, yes, but for such relationships, it's strictly prohibited because we are maintaining the highest standards of ethics and humanity. The fifth important point is humanitarian workers are obliged to report any concerns regarding C by fellow workers. Even if we are in doubt, if we've heard some rumors, never ever ignore them. Always report on them. Let the investigation committees or investigation bodies look into the cases, but we do not leave any chance of PSEA or C cases to error. This last and the sixth point, and which is very important, is humanitarian workers are obliged to create and maintain an environment which prevents sexual exploitation and abuse. Even if somebody is engaged in it, we generally say it's not my business, not my concern. But when it comes to cases of sexual exploitation and abuse, it is everyone's business. It is everyone's concern, and we are obliged to report on it. So it's not our choice whether to report on it or not, but it is our obligation to report on it. And also discourage people around you not to get involved in these kind of acts. So the key important 6 messages: there are no second chances, no sex with children, don't hire, bribe anyone for sex, no sex with beneficiaries, always report C, and discourage C around you. Next one, please. So we say that there's a key concept and core issue around sexual exploitation and abuse, and that is it is a result of abuse of power. When we're talking about the humanitarian context, the humanitarian aid worker carries a lot of power with him or herself by the virtue of the packages or the aid that person holds, compared to the beneficiary who is in absolute need of that support at that time. So some very important element is that sexual exploitation and abuse and harassment is a result of abuse of power, which can be because of gender, ethnicity, disability, socioeconomic class, education, or position in the organization. So even if you're not strictly in a humanitarian context, it even applies to a development context in which we work. So by the virtue of somebody is being poor or vulnerable, especially comparatively less in power because of the disability condition, because of the ethnicity, because of the gender, because of the socioeconomic class, that the abuse of power in that situation will lead to sexual exploitation and abuse and harassment. Lack of power can increase the risk of exploitation and abuse. Humanitarian aid workers, peace workers, and other working in development settings virtually always have more power over those who they serve. So people that the humanitarian aid workers are serving, there is, of course, a difference in power because of the power of the authority that they have to ensure the distribution of resources, money, or whatever, even registering them for the packages. So that group of people holds a lot of power, and abuse of that power will lead to sexual exploitation and abuse. Sexual exploitation and abuse not only undermines the image and effectiveness of our work, it also has serious consequences for the individual and the communities affected. So not only one individual is affected, but the whole community gets affected, because then the trust on the humanitarian aid, the trust on the humanitarian program, and trust on the humanitarian community is seriously affected. They may not want to reach out to the humanitarian aid and may suffer more because of that situation. So these are some key messages and key concepts around the sexual exploitation and abuse and harassment. Moving forward, I think this was the basic key concepts that we wanted to discuss today before we move forward to the actual issues in the context of Pakistan.
Yeah, thank you, Marjabeen. Thank you so much, Marjabeen, for a wonderful presentation and discussion with us, and it is also, quite informative for all of us. Now, moving on that, I'm going to invite our next speaker, which is Madam Neelam Hussain. Ma'am Neelam Hussain is a researcher and a teacher. He's actually teaching as well as working with the same work, which is a resource center, and it is also, conducting research on women issues, and she's also expert in the linguistics. So I'm going to invite and now handing over the session to Madam Neelam.
Thank you, Hafsa. Can we start moving the slides, please? I'm going to be discussing the conceptual foundations of sexual violence. And I'll start with saying that sexual violence, abuse, exploitation are embedded in patriarchy. They are systemic. So they are not acts by criminals or psychopaths or antisocial elements, but they are part of the systemic arrangements of patriarchy and therefore form the basis of it. In this sense, sexual violence is, yes, defined as forms of sexual violence are defined as criminal acts, but sexual violence is also a mechanism of control to control and manage women's sexuality. The characteristics of patriarchy are the deeply ingrained, I don't think this is the way I had it. Anyway, sexual violence is premised on the control of women's sexuality, on their reproductive and their productive potential. Can we move the slide, please? As I said, sexual violence is endemic to patriarchy, and patriarchy is premised on the control of women's productive, reproductive, and sexual potential. So, and this is starts in the designation of women as property, And in the custom of the gift exchange of women, where a woman is given in marriage by a man of the family, her father, to another man, her husband. She traditionally does not have much say in the matter. Yes, things are changing, but this is the fundamental pattern. And her function so she is without an identity, her own. Her identity is relational. She's either the daughter or sister of a man, or she's the wife or mother of a man. She is not a woman in her own right, per se, or does not have an autonomous, independent identity in the discourse of patriarchy. When she's handed over in marriage in peace times, similarly, this thing in conflict situations or in moments of tribal or group antagonisms translates into cultural practices like swara, where a woman is handed over or a girl is handed over by the weaker tribe to the men of the stronger tribe to end the conflict. But the exchange, the object of exchange is the woman. What happens to her in the once she's with the other tribe is her business. The natal family, the parental family just hands her over and that's it. So she's an object, she's property. And this is the foundation of violence. Then as a wife, her role, the other systemic or factor that perpetuates the violence against women is the system of patrilineal, where the name of the father is handed over to the children. The mother is eliminated in that. The name of the father is passed on to the child, essentially the male child, because the daughter loses her name and gets the husband's name when she moves, and also the property. You can say that, yes, in Islam, the women do get their share of the property, but A, it is less than that of the man, and B, customarily in practice, women are often deprived of that right through emotional blackmail, through bypassing, through referring to older colonial laws where customary practice was focused upon. But even today, when the focus is on Islamic rights, the women are often bypassed. In any case, their share is half that of the man. Now, the woman's job is to produce a son. And that is where, again, there's space for violence. Because if she doesn't produce a son, if she doesn't have children, then again, she can be given a tough time among the in-laws, including by the mothers-in-law, because women are the gatekeepers of patriarchy and they're part of the same system. So it isn't as if only men are violent. As part of the system, women too can be violent. As Majubin has earlier said, violence can be of women, by women of less powerful men, and so on. But this is that. Now, patriarchy, because it requires the passage of name and property to the legitimate offspring of the man, it lays a high value on the woman's premarital virginity and on postmarital fidelity to the man. The same is not required of the man. Nobody expects a man to be a virgin when he gets married. In fact, it's part of his masculinity that he should be experienced. Although the moral law may be technically say it's the same for men and women, in actual practice, the onus of maintaining premarital chastity, maintaining her virginity is on the woman. And that is where the vulnerability lies. That is where rape comes in and threats of rape come in as a mechanism of control. Women are told, don't step out of the house, X, you may get raped. If you get raped, you are devalued. Discursively, we say that rape is a fate worse than death. Now, who says that? I don't think any woman has said that. It is a male, man-made injunction because it then puts the onus of responsibility on the woman and justifies some ill treatment if she loses her virginity although the perpetrator is the man, the victim of that violence is the woman, and also the carrier of blame. Somewhere the woman is blamed for not saving herself from rape. And so it comes full circle. Don't go out of the house, don't go out to work, don't go out at night, because if you get raped, it will be your fault. The man is not only exonerated from that blame, he is enabled to commit rape and violence with impunity. Similarly, with domestic violence, if a man beats his wife, then he's keeping a check on her behavior. And this is a vicious kind of a cycle. It impacts at other levels also. In terms of her mobility, in terms of her economic access, economic independence. And if women are not economically independent, again, it's a vicious circle. They don't have a voice. They don't have a voice to speak out for themselves. They don't have a voice to, they're denied education. Because education, what does a woman need education for? Because the focus of her identity is on her reproductivity, not on her productivity, although the unpaid work that a woman puts in the home and outside as informal labor and as part of the formal economy, and women are sustaining households, but the legal head of the household continues to be the man, even if he's a layabout and even if he doesn't do a damn day's work, bit of work. He has that position. And there have been instances, horrific instances, of a village in the Punjab, near Kasur, where the wives of daily wage laborers, and daily wage labor is uncertain because you don't really get work every day necessarily. They go to the nearby forest to collect firewood, which they sell and buy the food and keep the home fire burning also. So, but the forest rangers or the people there then exploit them sexually. It is okay, you may collect firewood, but for sexual favors. The whole village knows of it, but they're silent. The only thing is that the man who is living off that woman's labor, living off the sexual exploitation she goes through on a regular basis, also turns around and accuses her of being of a woman of ill repute. So it's multiple levels of violence that come. Rape again is therefore somewhere becomes an indelible part of being female. If you're a woman, you're bound to get raped. Why? Nobody asked that question. Because the responsibility, because it is again the woman as object of sexual pleasure, of reproductive labor, and the sidelining of her economic productivity. The man is the breadwinner, the woman is not. And there is a division here between the good woman and the bad woman. The good woman is the one who maintains her virtue and is married and produces children for the family. The woman who has not got married or who has no other means of subsistence then is the bad woman who is associated with the brothel. Again, for the sexual pleasure or convenience of the male. The profits again go to the pimps and the owners of brothel, the brothel keepers. So it's a double kind of economic and sexual exploitation, which is part of the system. And as I said earlier, it is and why is this? Why is this? And this is not just in Pakistan. This is fairly universal. I don't know if you know that it was only in the 1990s, after the 50,000 rapes in Bosnia and about 250,000 rapes in Sierra Leone, that rape was recognized as a crime as a war crime. Before that, it was seen as a crime against the family, against the dignity of the woman, but not very seriously taken. And also the whole system of gift exchange, where in peace times a woman is given and taken in marriage, it's an exchange between men, or to resolve local disputes, tribal disputes. In wartime, that same woman becomes war booty. It's again a justification traditionally of rape, of violence. As I said, it is only in the 1990s that the UN took notice of of rape as a war crime and expanded the definition of rape. But until then, rape was part of being, well, the woman's fate. And what I do want to point out here is that there is a gap. There is a huge gap between, yes, Mahjabeen has given us the definitions, defined behaviors, actions to be taken, but there is a disjunction between the official discourse on violence and how to deal with sexual violence and exploitation, and how violence is perceived and enacted socially at the level of communities. Because at the community level, I mean, the message hasn't trickled down, not enough. A lot of work needs to be done for women and men across class to reflect upon these differentials, these inequalities. And the fact that women have low access to resources, to voice, to choice, to agency, they're not allowed to speak. I mean, recently over the past few years, the younger generation feminists have been taking out what is called the Aurat March on every 8th March as a celebration of the women's movement, but also of a time to air their demands and express their grievances. And one of the slogans which raised cries of outrage was Mera Jism Meri Marzi, which translated, I mean, is my body, my right. But the outrage came as to how dare the woman speak about her own body. The body, after all, is the man's property. He is the one who can do with it what he will. The woman the woman who speaks about her own body is shameless. And this pans out at so many levels in terms of the resistance to providing children with age-appropriate child sex education for their own safety. Kids cannot protect themselves if they don't know what they are to be protecting and what they are protecting themselves against. The same thing continues in adolescence in terms of menstrual health and hygiene. Women are not meant to talk about these things. Mothers are shy about discussing these matters with their daughters. Fathers are shy about discussing pre-pubertal and pubertal growth with their young sons. These are frightening times for young children, but then things that can't be spoken about. Because they can't be spoken about, the outcome is health problems, psychological problems, early age marriage, underage marriage, because the health implications are not known, or even if they're known, they are not really discussed openly. And that is where tradition and custom take over, because the desire to marry off a girl early is to protect her virginity. The parents want to hand over that responsibility to the man's family, to her husband, and relax after that. Because as long as the girl is with them, her value, her virginity is a commodity that has to be preserved. And that becomes a site of violence. And this is, again, discursively, I think the best example of it is the language of abuse. I think abuse in South Asia certainly is fairly common and fairly similar, but it is not only gender specific, it is addressed, it itemizes the woman's body parts and aims the abuse at that. The rape of and violation of her different body parts and what the man can do to them. Now, this is the common currency language from the littlest urchin to the highest in the land, including chief justices and heads of state and parliamentarians and respectable members of society. Men abuse as part of their daily language of communication, of conversation, of jokes. And jokes is another thing which denigrates women. So discursively, and then the whole thing is repeated by the media. Okay, I should stop, I'm running out of time. But these are things to think about. Look at the television plays, look at our talk shows, look at the low priority given to women's issues, look at the low budgets allocated to women's safety and education. And there we have the problem. I'll stop here, and I think we can answer the questions as they open up these things in the questions that come. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for elaborating the details and about the root causes of sexual exploitation and abuse, which lies in the power dynamics and other cultural practices in Pakistan. So now we are going to open floor. And first of all, I want to invite Ms. Skovia Rupani, who has raised hand, and I wanted to listen to her question first. Then we are going to check chat box, and we are going to answer each question one by one. So moving on to the questions which we received from our participants today. The first question we received: are there any institutions who are working to educate and raise awareness for women and building their capacities? So I wanted to check with Mahjabeen to respond to this question. So Mahjabeen, can you please respond to this question?
Thank you, Hafsa. I've been, there's a few questions around it. As Ma'am Neelam also shared on her slides, the legislation part is slightly weak, weak in Pakistan. The implementation part is even weaker. So yes, there are challenges, but there's several opportunities where this work can be done. So yes, the institutions are there, the protection, the women cells, the women protection cell, women development departments, all these are working around these issues. But yes, there is a huge need to build their institutional capacities, build their human resource capacities, and build mechanisms around it. When we're talking about the complaints around SEAH, sexual exploitation and abuse, there are many ethical considerations involved in that. So what are those ethical considerations? How to respond in, while ensuring confidentiality, safety, all these elements. So this is extremely important that we build their capacities before we start a life. Yes, this is very important to build their capacities. At the same time, it is extremely important that we do no further harm by not being aware of these ethical considerations in response involved. So yes, as I said, there are institutions available, there are mechanisms available, but the capacities are very limited, and there's a huge need to build their capacities to ensure safe and confidential response to these issues.
Right. Thank you, Mahjabeen. So the next question is about how we can change the mindset, especially the mindset of the little older people, and who are actually, talking about the patriarchy in a different way. So I want to refer this question to Ma'am Neelam. Ma'am Neelam, if you can respond to this question, how we can change the mindset of the people, especially who are talking about patriarchy, especially some of the guest speakers that can highlight patriarchy as a key solution for us. So over to you now, ma'am.
I think patriarchy is a problem, not a solution. And yeah, there are maybe systems in place, but what is the link between the systems that are in place or the definitions that UN agencies and official discourse has set in place and the people? How is that message reaching down to the larger body of society? I don't think it's reaching very far. My own experience has been, and this is through some of the work we've done in women's economic empowerment, that once women become economically independent, they not only acquire a voice, the fact that they're bringing in money gives them the latitude to speak out, but just economic empowerment is not enough. Awareness is also needed, awareness of rights, awareness of wrongs, not just their own, but for men also. It is men as well as women who have to be made aware. But women more than men, because they are the ones who have to fight for their rights. They are the ones who are at the receiving end. And as one woman says, so it is awareness plus economic independence, plus the opportunity to get together to act. And we have found this in our BATACs, where we've got men and women together to address local issues and highlight issues and to take joint action. So this is one way, but it is not the only way. The other factor is media. you have to address the media. The media is very, very patriarchal, very biased. It works through stereotypes. It works through cliches, which reinforce male-female gender roles, which focus upon the passivity of the woman and the aggressive relation, the past active relationship between men and women, even in their sexual relation. So that has to be addressed.
Thank you, ma'am. But related question is also what we can do to change the mindset, particularly the men and the boys in society generally. And there is a question, if you know any organization who are working for changing the mindset of especially male members in our society.
Well, the women's movement is trying to do that. Aurat March is doing that. Women's Action Forum is doing that. But then women's organizations, Simurg is one, Shirkat Ka is another, Asar, when it was working, was doing that work. But it is not enough. I mean, there are other organizations also. So much more work needs to be done. But officially, if rules can be set for the media to not promote or project a particular kind of stereotype all the time, consistently, of the good woman who gets whacked and goes to heaven because she allows herself to be beaten, and the bad woman is the one who raises her voice. It reinforces patriarchy, it reinforces violence.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. So the next question is about how to identify a sexual abuse. Means to say that if something happened by a trusted person who will confuse it's happened by consciously or unconsciously, to how we can identify. So this is a question I want to refer to Majibin, to you. So the question is actually, when it's something happened by a person which we are familiar, it's a known to us. So it's sometimes really difficult, or maybe he's doing consciously or unconsciously. Who can identify this?
Hafsa, I'd like to mention one thing is that harassment, abuse, and violence is mostly happening with persons that we know very well, or we are close with, or we have frequent interaction with. And I totally relate to understand this point that when we are so much in frequent communication or contact, things happen gradually, and we stop realizing that one person is being exploited. But I would say it's constant awareness, sensitization through different approaches in different channels. And as Ma'am Neelam rightly mentioned, media has a very important role. Electronic, social, print media, where we do as much as sensitization as possible so that we're able to differentiate between the different types. And when it happens to somebody, they realize that this is not right. This is not part of culture. This is not part of ethical values. This needs to be, we need to send frequent messages for sensitization. This is one side of the self-awareness, which is very important. The other side is the response. So again, going back, building the institutional capacities, and it's not one institution that we're talking about. There's so many different institutions involved where we need to work on their capacities to respond. And again, it's not limited to few actors who can contribute to it, but it's number of actors, all of us, irrespective of our field of work, we all need to contribute to it.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So it's everybody's responsibility to stop it and prevent it. So the next two questions I wanted to refer to Ma'am Neelam, which is related. One is, what are the key, response mechanisms, or what are the factors influencing strong legal frameworks in our society? Number one, and how we can stop domestic violence. That's one question I just received here. So, ma'am, can you please respond to that? What are the legal, factors who can make the legal framework more strong and strengthened in our society?
The law has to relook at its own discourse also. I mean, I'll give one example, the case of Mukhtar Mai, who was gang raped by the stronger tribe, and the case was decided against her. The case was decided against her on legal points where she was blamed for not reporting the case immediately. What the judges failed to do, with the exception of Justice Nasrul Mulk, whose dissenting note is a very important one, the judges failed or refused to take account of the social dynamics of the community. So if you sit in your high courts and Supreme Courts and don't look down at the people, at the earth, the ground where things are happening, and disconnect yourself from that, then the judgment is going to be flawed. Because it was Nasrul Mulk who pointed out that with an illiterate woman and a weaker tribe and the others with greater social clout, it took them time to report the case. Again, knowledge and awareness about medical legal exams. That too is an awareness that needs to be filtered down to the community level, which is where the state institutions come in. Okay, NGOs are doing their bit, but NGOs are a pinch of salt in the ocean. The state has the power and the resources to put its money where its mouth is. And unfortunately, it doesn't do that. In fact, its mouth is also not where it should be. I mean, if you look at the kind of language used in Parliament against women parliamentarians by male parliamentarians, you don't have to ask further questions.
Okay, ma'am, there is one more question for you. It is saying that please highlight the importance of economic empowerment of women, and it can also contribute to reduce the risk of sexual exploitation, and how?
Again, I'll cite from my own experience in the field. One of our women said, you know, when we started this work, women were not allowed to own cell phones because the men felt they'll call up their boyfriends or do whatever. Once they had their skill training and started earning money, the family realized how important the cell phone was in getting contacts, in getting work, in reaching out to the market. Every woman had an Android phone. Every woman who had not been allowed to go out to the market alone had the mobility. They were earning their money. Because they were earning their money, they maintained control over it. They were able to send their girls to school, pay for the school fees, support their husbands, maintain themselves, look after their own personal health also. And as one woman said to us, and I'll say this in Urdu or Punjabi, and the translator can translate it, कि एक दफा पैसा घर में औरत लाने लग जाए तो मर्द की इज्जत और खानदान की इज्जत.
Once the woman starts bringing money to home, then the man loses his importance as an earning and breadwinner.
I think women's economic empowerment is very important, but not just economic empowerment alone. Economic empowerment has to come with information, with awareness, with knowledge of their rights, with knowledge of their own bodies, of their own physical well-being, and of somewhere the breaking of the taboo of silence on women's voices.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Now, next question, I will check. I'm referring to Mahjabeen. Mahjabeen, there are two questions which are related. One, what are our panelists' recommendations for civil society organizations? What they need to do to address and prevent sexual exploitation and abuse issue? And secondly, what kind of support they are asking, the other institutions like UNFPA and other UN agencies are providing. So these are the two related questions. Yeah.
Thank you. Hafsa, I would say civil society organization has a very important role. They are in Pakistan in huge numbers, and it is very important that their policies, the program policies, HR policies, are fully compliant to the protection against sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. There should be very strict HR policies on recruitments when they're recruiting staff who they should check their background. Specifically on this, generally we check them on their professional capacities and capabilities and discipline, but this should be a very important element that needs to be checked in. The program policies should be fully compliant. I'm going back to the two categories. One is workplace harassment and one is with the beneficiaries. This is our responsibility that when we are providing support to the beneficiaries, it is our responsibility as civil society organizations to build their knowledge about their rights and where they can report the complaint. And it is the civil society organization's responsibility to place the confidential and safe reporting mechanisms, which they can address on immediate basis. So this is individual civil society, individual organizations' responsibility. As UNFPA, as you mentioned initially, we have an Pakistan PSEA network, Pakistan Protection Against Sexual Exploitation and Abuse Network, which is a representative body of UN agencies and civil society organizations from all across Pakistan. The purpose of this network is to develop guidelines, build technical capacities, and including trainings and guidelines both for the humanitarian organizations, including development organizations, to ensure their compliance to the protection against sexual exploitation and abuse. Also work with the government.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So now I want to share one thing, because the question referred to RSH program as well, which support we can do. We are providing contextualized materials in Urdu language as well, so that the people can get access to this material online. These materials are available on our Hub RSH page, and you can go and download any material which is related to you. Then these kind of sessions, discussions, and the round tables are also, through this mechanism, we are also trying to help people to building their capacity and understanding on sexual exploitation and abuse issues in Pakistan. So we have come to our end of today's discussion. I know there could be a lot more questions that can be answered, but definitely we are going to have a follow-up session after such break. Then we will definitely plan another session on this topic. So thank you so much for your questions and for your comments. We are going to share the recording of this webinar on our webpage, and the presentation will be shared there as well. And there are different services we are offering to CSOs. Ask an Expert service. You can reach to us for any support you require to build your policies on safeguarding. I also want to especially want to thank my keynote speakers, Ms. Marjabeen and Madam Neelam, especially. They take out time to have to join us today and having a discussion with us. Then I also want to thank to all the participants who participated and make this event a really useful and insightful with their questions in the comments. So RSH will continue discussions on the key topics, which is related to safeguarding and sexual exploitation and abuse. And we are also sharing some of the key materials which can help organizations to build their safe culture in their organization. So this program is open to everyone. And under this, we are also going to offer a mentorship program. We already launched this program, and we are going to start very soon. On ending note, I wanted to highlight one service that is available for all the CSOs, which is Ask an Expert service. You can check on our web page, and you can write to us for the support to develop your policy, or whether to develop your mechanism for the responding sexual exploitation and abuse and harassment issues in Pakistan, or any organization if you are facing at your organization level. So we can provide this support to you. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today, and have a great evening.